Moscow today is under major strain as massive events are now confluencing all at once. You saw that Lieutenant General Vladimir Alexeyev of the Russian military was hit by gunfire right outside of his home. Not only was it off of a major highway in full view of everybody, but the regime is supposed to be untouchable there, and this breach proves that security is gone. However, Alexeyev must be understood as more than just one of Russia's top generals inside of Ukraine. He is also one of the Kremlin's top military fixers. He contained the elites and their panic after the Wagner mutiny. When the fixers become the targets, internal restraint disappears, fear it moves upward, and decision making slows. And the rivalries, they stop staying so quiet. Today, the most dangerous battlefield for the Kremlin is no longer Ukraine. It is the circle around Vladimir Putin. My name is Dr. Jason Smart. I'm a national security advisor and a Kyiv Post special correspondent. The situation right now for Russia is quite acute, and it's about to get worse because right now it's being hit on all sides. Incredibly, the Kremlin acts like everything is fine, that it's not at all alarmed. However, the most incredible part is that some people still believe the Kremlin. So help us get the truth to more people. What's really happening inside of Ukraine to the world? If you haven't already, please subscribe now. 80% of our viewers have not yet subscribed. And if you haven't already, turn on the notifications so you know when a new video comes out. And that's one of the key things you could do to help us get the word about Ukraine to more people. And like using the hypes that YouTube is now rolling out, just clicking that right under this video also helps us get the message to more people. And it also tells YouTube that you want the truth and not Russian propaganda, nor uninformed dribble. Thank you. First, we have to understand that the Russian budget is in a wartime triage. Now, officially, Russia claims it has a deficit of about $46 billion, though intelligence reports indicate it's probably closer to $100 billion. Now, keep in mind, the government right now is borrowing at about 16%. That means that every new shortfall is going to compound very quickly. But more importantly, is that their national budget is built on a single point of failure, and it has a name: oil and gas revenues. The 2026 budget anticipated about $108 billion in energy revenue. But it looks like now India is not interested in that deal and is looking at about walking from $22 billion of purchases. But if India and China both stop buying Russian oil and gas, that works out to about $33 billion. That would mean that all of a sudden that $46 billion deficit becomes $79 billion. But it gets more brutal for Russia yet further, because with the less export cash, that means there's going to be fewer imports and higher cost. But also because of that, inflation stays hot. The rates, they remain high, and the borrowing gets more expensive. And at first, this decay might seem very quiet, but it will get much more visible as Russia has to put off things like repairs. In Belgorod right now, we see that the 80,000 people there without heating, without infrastructure, they're that way because of their government. The government in Russia has chosen to prioritize this war, to not prioritize its citizens. It decided to drain pipes around the entire city because it could not fix them. There was no money for it. So imagine this: the government in Moscow is willing to spend billions of dollars a year on a war, but not enough to keep its own citizens from freezing to death. But very importantly, Belgorod is not just a city with civilians. It is an incredibly important city for Russia's military planning. With that city now in jeopardy, it's going to make it harder for Russia to launch attacks on Ukraine. But there's something else going on that is compounding the problems that Russia faces. Those attacks on Ukraine got a lot more complicated now that there's no longer Starlink for the Russians to use. It's used with their drones like the BM-35, and it's also used with the terminals that they have. But what's the most incredible thing about this is that Starlink today, if it's not used by the Russians, is going to mean that they have to fall back on their older radio systems. Those are easy to both jam and to intercept. But more than that, it makes it impossible for them to use the drones as they've been using them. And that's why today on the battlefield, we see that things are getting more complicated for the regime. In fact, today on the battlefield, we see that they are struggling to keep up with these ongoing attacks. And that's why today it looks like there's more territory being taken back by Ukraine in places like Kupiansk. Some might wonder, why do Russia's leaders continue to do things that are so obviously bad, so obviously stupid, so obviously against their own country's interest, against their own interest if they want stability? The answer is simple. This is not new to the Putin regime. This goes back to Soviet history as well. Look at the Soviet Pacific Fleet in 1981, where we saw senior officers treat a military cargo flight like private cargo. And the reason was very simple, because nobody could tell them no. And that's why a Tupolev 104 crashed 8 seconds after takeoff. And it was all because high-ranking officers had overloaded the hold with furniture, safes, and oranges. And the cause was overload. With safes, with televisions, with tape recorders, with furniture, and all these things went up in flames, destroyed in seconds. 13 admirals and 3 generals all died because everybody thought the rules did not apply to them. They weren't worried about the consequences of their actions. And that's a small illustration, though, of the larger problem that Russia faces. Today, Russia is pushing out these myths that they can do whatever they want, but it doesn't really meet up with the reality. Look at Russia now that is pushing the new 30mm programmable shells for the BMP-2s. They're supposed to be used with the attack helicopters. Now, the pitch there is simple. It's supposed to burst at the right moment and knock drones out of the sky. The problem, though, is not that. It's the platform. The vehicles lack the digital fire control that is needed to use them. And that means the guns cannot set the timing and the shell cannot be programmable. Without the programming, the round functions as a standard explosive shell. The same effect, new branding, just with more money. But Russia markets these as advanced anti-drone weapons, and they're described as being the innovation of the future. But today we see that the Kremlin is forced to lie a lot. Look what we see what Ukraine is doing in comparison. Ukraine's Flamingo FP5, it can fly 3,000 kilometers, 1,864 miles, and can carry a load of 1,150 kilograms. That's 2,530 pounds. Which reminds me, check out the first pinned comment below with the question of the day and with a video that you should check out. But right below that, you can see how you can help the Ukrainian soldiers get what they need to win. And all donations right now are being matched. Thank you. Now, what's so incredible about that is that the FP5 Flamingo is described as successfully striking the Kapustin Yar test range in Astrakhan region. What's more incredible about that is that it is Russia's strategic missile program that was struck. When you're able to carry out attacks like this using your own technology made at home, that's something that Russia cannot claim. Russia for months now has been talking about the incredible Oreshnik missile. But so far, how many times have you seen it used? Successfully, we've only seen it used a couple of times. It seems there's a lot of talk, but very little do. The Russians talk about innovation. They talk about advancing. But when we look at the battlefield today, they're not advancing. Russia is losing territory in major cities. Cities like Kupiansk that it claimed that it took months ago. But ever more clear it is, Russia has failed in that as well. Russia today is not winning by any sort of measure of the imagination. In fact, it's in a situation that's becoming more complex. Because inside of Moscow, everybody's very clear about the economic situation. The Kremlin itself has no illusions of what's happening. But they believe, by looking the other way, putting their heads in the sand, the problem will naturally get better. But the most incredible part is look how they try to deal in their international relations today. President Zelensky mentioned that the U.S. delegation was likely being offered a $12 trillion deal in order to make a deal with Russia against the interests of Ukraine, which is absolutely absurd. Russia's entire economy is not worth that much money. In fact, Russia's entire national budget is less than $600 billion. So where would they possibly get $12 trillion to make any sort of a deal with a foreign country? It is absolutely asinine. So facing these challenges today, what is Russia likely to do? Will it back down? Will it give up? History would indicate that most likely it will not. It will continue to fight. Because so far, it's been successful in convincing enough people that it is winning and that it can win and that it will win. And there's a reason I think, though, that the Russians might have even bigger plans. In fact, a recent German war game suggests that Russia could try to snatch up the Suwalki Gap using only about 15,000 troops. The incredible part is that the Russians bet that the West would wait too long to respond. Everybody would be uncertain what the Americans might do. And that sort of uncertainty is exactly what the Russians want. Because if there's a seed of doubt, they can do their best to make sure that it grows, to make sure that there's more confusion, to make sure that there's more conflict. And right now, Russia is doing its best to make sure that happens. So going ahead, according to General Ben Hodges, who wrote the article, the most important thing we can do today is to prepare for our future, to be sure that we have the right security. Because there's one thing that Vladimir Putin has been very good at so far, making sure that we do not prepare for the war that he wants to fight. Keep in mind, Putin today understands that his country is not doing well in Ukraine, and that's why, by expanding, he could come off with a victory. Imagine if Russia tomorrow were to take something like the Suwalki Gap, and imagine it did not meet force. Whatever else happens in Ukraine would not matter to his population. At that point, he could easily say, look, we've won, we've beaten NATO, and that for him would be a much bigger victory. And more than that, undoubtedly he believes that would convince the West to make a deal with Ukraine. Lose more of Ukraine, but keep more of Europe. And that's the sort of bet that Putin likes to make. So looking ahead, things are looking like they might get very turbulent very soon. But the good news is, despite the lies of the Kremlin, despite the fact that it has these incredible strategies and the huge plans for the future, there's something that's happening beneath the surface. And that's the Russian economy. The Russian economy today cannot support these plans. The best thing we could do is to make the situation even worse. If you'd like some insight as to what's really going to happen next, check out this video. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.